Good morning. So I'm Dr. Sandy Mann. I'm clinical lead at Sparta Health. And this webinar is being put on in partnership with Custodian, and they specialise in providing HR, employment dispute and tribunal insurance to UK businesses of all sizes. I teach applied clinical psychology at university. I've got a private clinic specialising in anxiety, depression and trauma. First one was a really good question. How do you gain some value from the interactions when even with video calling they miss the human touch? That human element is so important to gaining that trust and that rapport with somebody. So I'm going to share with you the things that I've learned over the past 5 or 6 months, particularly when doing therapy. So the main thing, or one of the first things, is about eye contact. It's really hard to do when you're doing by Zoom because there are so many distractions and you haven't got them in front of you. And the biggest distraction, of course, is that little picture of you in the corner. So what I really recommend is that you turn off that little image in the corner of yourself because it is very distracting. Try and give eye contact as much as possible. Tone of voice is much more important with Zoom or with remote access when you're doing things remotely, as are gestures. They can't be seen. So we need to exaggerate them. So gestures have to be much closer to your face. Sometimes you might have to repeat things. So whereas we normally rely on that non-verbal communication, sometimes you might have to just say it verbally and repeat things. Just being a little bit more explicit in your interactions. The next question is, how can we use this moment in time as a turning point in our approach to mental health? All I can do really is share some of the positive benefits on my own mental health and the mental health of my clients. For example, slowing down, doing less, spending more time with our family, prioritizing different things, our health, our well-being, our family, perhaps exercising more. If it's not possible to have an hour's exercise in the day, you're probably working too much. I'm going to move on now to the area where I've had most of the questions. How can people cope with the feeling that they're not in control? How to cope with burnout? How can I help and support my colleagues? What can I do if I'm feeling overwhelmed? Are there effective ways to manage stress in quarantine? So managing anxiety, obviously there's a lot to be anxious about right now. We're coming out of lockdown. We had all those months, those 3 months when we didn't have to make decisions, but now we have to make those decisions about what risks to take. Well, that can be quite stressful. There's anxiety about new ways of working. And for some people, there's a real social anxiety about getting back to reality. And of course, that ever looming fear of the future in terms of jobs, job security, redundancy and things like that. But let me start by pointing out that there are actually some benefits to anxiety. When I deal with anxious clients, I always start off by saying, look, we don't want to totally get rid of your anxiety. Some anxiety is healthy. Anxiety is a helpful emotion. One of the benefits is that being anxious about something can prepare us for something and help us find solutions. It can also increase our motivation to get things done. So if we're not anxious about things, we're not likely to be as well prepared. This isn't about eliminating anxiety, this is about managing it. What I find is that anxious people tend to have some unrealistic views about worry. Sometimes they think that if I worry about something, it will help me cope. Some people also think that worrying shows how responsible you are, but you can challenge that thought by looking at people who are still good, responsible citizens but don't worry excessively. Some people think that worrying about something prevents that negative outcome from happening. Sometimes that's called in the trade as magical thinking or thought event fusion, where you think your thoughts can affect the actual events from happening or prevent them from happening. And there's actually a good reason why people that worry think that. And it's because of experience. The chances are they've worried and worried and worried about all sorts of really catastrophic negative outcomes that have never happened. So in their brain, they start to associate worry with these events not happening. And the way I illustrate that with anxious clients who have that sort of magical belief is I say to people who are afraid of flying that when you actually get to the crux of it, a lot of them feel that if I don't worry, this plane is going to crash. And obviously we all know that passenger in 3B worrying in seat 3B isn't what's keeping that plane up. So we all know that. So when you put it like that, most people can realise that there isn't probably a connection between their worrying and keeping bad events from happening. It's also worth looking at unhelpful thinking styles. Anxious people tend to overestimate threat whilst underestimating their own ability to cope. They also might use emotional reasoning. So if I feel afraid, there must be something to be fearful of. If I fear for my job, then that means my job is at risk. But there isn't necessarily a correlation between how we feel and the reality. Just because we're afraid of something doesn't mean that thing is dangerous. A lot of people are very afraid of spiders, but it doesn't actually mean spiders are dangerous. In fact, they're not very dangerous. Mushrooms are more dangerous than spiders, and we should actually be more afraid of mushrooms than spiders, but we're not, because we're going with our emotion, not with rationality. The other unhelpful thinking style that we often engage in is fortune telling, where we think we know what's going to happen. So to cope with these sorts of thoughts, it's really useful to redirect attention to the facts and only use trusted resources. It's also useful to categorize anxieties and worries, especially into those things that you can do something about and those things that you can't. So two sets of worries, two sets of categories of anxieties. Sometimes I advise people to draw a kind of mind map where you put your worry in the middle and all the things leading off it that are connected with that worry. So they'll have those things in the middle that they can control and those things outside that they can't control. So we might not be able to control whether redundancy happens, for example, but we can control how we feel about it. We can control our own resilience. We can control our own following our own advice. We can limit our information. We can eat healthily, all those sorts of things. But we can't control other things. And we need to separate those out and try and worry less about those things that we can't control. We can control perhaps making how we deal with things and perhaps making ourselves accessible to getting skills that make us more employable. Some of the other questions are very much connected with uncertainty around employment and work and redundancy, as well as uncertainty around the COVID situation. Uncertainty is very much connected with anxiety and stress. And in fact, uncertainty is what maintains the worry cycle. And I speak to a lot of people in organisations who even say to me, I don't even mind if I'm made redundant. I just want to know. I just want to know. It's this living in limbo that's the hardest part. And that's what we need to try and help our employees cope with, that managing of uncertainty. And there's been more and more uncertainty over the past 5-6 months than ever before, or at least it's felt that way. But really, this is just an illusion. And now that's kind of breaking, but it is just an illusion. We've never really been certain of anything. We've just felt certain. There's never been certainty of employment and non-redundancy. That's never really happened. When people are anxious and they face uncertainty, they are more likely to see ambiguous situations as threatening. And this can make them less confident about decision making and make them more anxious. So we need to try and help people see situations as a little bit less threatening. It's always going to be less threatening if you feel that you are employable elsewhere. So looking at managing your CV and work skills and gaining experiences and things like that can make you feel a little bit more in control of that situation. We have to build up our tolerance of that discomfort of not knowing, of being uncertain. What I often do with clients is I get them to write lists of all the things in life that they think they're certain about, but actually they're not. We think we're certain, but nothing is certain in the world. But because we're not focusing on those, we don't get anxious about them. So the trick is to try and build up tolerance of uncertainty. A related question to that is, with many things and businesses not having certainty, how do you communicate uncertainty to employees? Or is it best not to say anything? And another related question to that, any tips on giving positive messaging to staff members who may be worried about their job security? So in relation to all of those, it's really about being human, explaining why things are unknown, not pretending that things are okay, not pretending that we know what's happening, explaining why we don't know what's happening, and offer whatever information you can about what is known. Don't offer false reassurances. I think it's really important to be open and honest and to talk about these things. Communication is always really key. And I think a lot of organisations feel that they need to dampen down the fears and insecurity by not talking about things, but that's probably just going to stoke up the anxiety. So 3 questions that people have raised. How do employers motivate, create or maintain teamwork as remote working becomes so common? With remote working, how much should employers check in with their staff? Too much, it'll feel like interference. Too little and may risk lack of supervision. And what is the best way of supervising remote workers? I think the best way to do that is to be human, to offer the human touch. But there's also lots of different ways to be creative about managing group cohesion. It's not that difficult to do. You just need a little bit of imagination. You can have virtual pub sessions. There's actually real advantage to being zoomed from your own home. You get to see more of people's personal space. And rather than that being a negative thing, a distraction, kids walking in, pets in the background, partners, phones ringing, whatever, those things can show that you're more human. They can show a more personal side to you. So we've seen people do show and tell sessions where you can see into people's lives and it builds up a connection. One of the other really nice things that I've seen in organisations in these difficult times is where your line manager checks in on you, arranges a chat just to see how you're doing. So this isn't to discipline you or to say you're not doing things right. It's just, let's have a chat. Make some notes so that the next time you check in, you've not forgotten it all, because there's nothing as uncaring as having to say the same thing again to your line manager. Don't micromanage. That's a bit of a problem when we're not with people. We should be looking more now at accomplishments rather than activity. It's about just letting go, trusting your staff and letting them know that they're trusted. That's something that staff very much value. Bring some fun into it. These are difficult times. Let's have some fun. It can really motivate staff and also shows that you're human, brings that humanity in. Occupational psychologists have long argued that factors such as need for recognition, self-esteem, self-actualization, and social interaction are quite key to understanding what motivates people at work. So we need to still keep that recognition going, keep people's self-esteem going, keep people fulfilled, making sure that they're doing fulfilling work. And as I say, that social interaction is really important. Communicating with them, keeping those important elements of fun, interaction, caring, really caring, can be really crucial here. Researchers have found that there are some factors that you can have too much of. So there are some factors where you do need these, but if you have too much of them, that can cause a lot of stress for people. Things like responsibility and challenge, job variety, interpersonal contact, the opportunity to use your skills. These are all things that we all need to a certain point, but if you have too much of that, that can cause stress as well. So it's managing the balance. The best way to check that the balance is okay is by speaking to employees, by arranging to have a chat with them. Is everything okay? Good communication is always key. If you are asking employees how they're feeling and they do disclose that they're feeling pretty bad, they're stressed, they're anxious or worse, then obviously you do need to be able to take that further. There are lots of online programs, but also we're here for you if you feel that your staff need any mental health services or support at this time. Even if you're not sure, you can always get in touch with us and we can assess and triage and see whether we can offer something that might help them. So from all of us Custodian, I'd just like to thank you very much for listening and stay safe and be well.